We've got a banner here about a man by the name of James Heeres, who is a retired school teacher at Whitehall High School. Never married. You said his dining room table is a Burger King.
It's an old Burger King.
It's an old Burger King
Yep.
bench, and and never married.
Right.
But I want Troy to take a few minutes. And how old is Red now?
87.
87 years old. Mm-hmm. All right. I just, in terms of legacy, because sometimes we think in terms of legacy, and if you think about it, you think about children, generations, and things like that, which is absolutely fabulous. But there's another side of legacy. Take a moment, Troy, and talk about Mr. Heeres.
Same. You're going to have to grab the mic from me, okay? Because there's a lot to tell.
Okay. You see, if that gets to 3-0, you're in trouble.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
I've heard you speak before.
I know. Okay. So here's the deal. He's my best friend. This guy up here on the banner, he's my best friend in the whole world. And when I was born, he was 34 years old. Right. So he's 87 now, and he's not here this morning. And one of the reasons is because he's working this morning. All right. He mows greens over at Hickory Knoll Golf Course in Whitehall. And how I first met Red was a long time ago. But when I first came to teach at Whitehall, I found out that there was a group of guys that met in Red's classroom every Friday morning just to read the Bible. And so I said, I'm in on that. That was 23 years ago. And we still, every Friday, meet at Red's house to read the Bible. I think about it, it's been almost half of my life I've spent my Fridays in this man's house reading the Bible. Amazing. And I was at a conference, kind of like this one here, and there was a speaker who stood up one day, and he says, some of you, every man should have someone that's a little further along in the faith to pray with every day. I was just goofy enough to believe the guy. And so the next day, I went into Red's classroom. I said, Red, would you be willing to pray with me and pray for me every day? He says, let's do it. That was 16 years ago. And every day for the last 16 years, either by phone or in person, Red and I have prayed with each other, and he has prayed for me. You get to know somebody real good if you read the Bible with them for 23 years and pray with them for 16 years. And this man has had such an impact on this guy's life. He's never been married, as Tim said, but he has had a huge impact on my marriage with Amy. Huge. He's never fathered his own children, but he's had a huge impact on my children and me as a father, and even now my grandchildren. Red Heeres, 87 years old, and I know I'm one of thousands. A public school teacher for 47 years. 47 years. And I tried to come up with an illustration example to kind of show what an epic teacher he was, and it still is. And this is what I got. You remember fire drills in school? Okay, by law, you got to evacuate the building, right? Not at Whitehall High School. Alarms go off, the entire building is evacuated, but Red Heeres is still teaching. He's in his classroom and he's teaching. And all of the kids are, through the alarms and everything, are still listening, and they don't want to leave the class. And the fire chief knows that when he walks down the hallway to inspect the school, Red's still in there teaching, just let him go. That's epic right there.
Yeah. Well, let me, if I could.
Yeah.
Some of you, especially from Dr. Barkley's camp, how many of y'all know Ken Blount, Nicodemus on the Gospel Bills? We had Ken in, and I told him about Mr. Heeres and how great a teacher he is. So I called Mr. Heeres up and I said, could we just come and sit in one of your classes? And Ken wanted to see, I want to see this man. I want to see him teach, because I told him about it. And we sat in the class and watched him, and he had even though in public school, he had scriptures on the wall, he had all sorts of stuff there. And the guy got up and was preaching and ministering to those kids. And Ken Blount, who's been a children's minister for, you just was like, and just to watch him anointed and graced in a public school to impact lives. And I can remember, Troy, I remember we had, because I live up in Whitehall, and we've got family here, the Bounds. I remember their oldest daughter came to me and said, talk to me about this class called self-discovery. And when she did, I'm like, that sounded a little new agey. And he taught a class called self-discovery that most kids that took that class never forget that class. It impacts their lives. And forgive me if I'm stealing your thunder, but at the end of that class, they'd get that butcher paper, and they'd put it on their back. And at the end of the class, students would go around and write things about that person, good things about that person. My daughter, Kelly, still has hers. Kids save that forever. Impacted kids' lives. Sorry, I couldn't be quiet.
That's awesome. So one of the things that I was trying to think of is what in the world makes this guy so effective? You know, what makes him? And Tony, you hit it out of the park yesterday. You hit Red Heeres yesterday. You had no idea you were doing it. And the only explanation I have is that this guy is intimate with God. He is intimate with God. I've never met a human being with a closer relationship with God. And it shows up then in how he cares for others. And it was so obvious because in his class, and every student and even people around him, he was always telling them this, hey, you are precious and worth 100 points. You are precious and worth 100 points. Hey, you listen to me. You listen to me. You are precious and worth 100 points. And he would say it all the time. Kids believed it. He just believed it. And they lived like that. He saw the image of his king on every single kid. And it was not out of the ordinary at all for me to go into Red's classroom before work started and to see him on his knees, his face buried in his desk chair with his class list, praying for every single one of his kids by name. And he would get up sometimes, because I'm interrupted him, and he'd have tears in his eyes as he's praying for these kids. And it challenged me. Do I have a list? Do I have one name that I pray for like that? And so I'm speaking for Red with great confidence because I know him well. In the early 1970s, he's in the cafeteria, okay, in Whitehall High School, and some guys come up to him and say, hey, Mr. Heeres, did you hear Darrell Underwood got saved? Did you hear he got saved? He says, really? Well, how about you guys come over on Thursday and let's read the Bible? Red would say those are the best words that ever came out of his mouth. Because not only did those four guys show up, but all their buddies showed up. And their buddies showed up. And you guys, Red's house every Thursday night filled with kids. I'm talking about kids sitting in the hallways of his home just to read the Bible. And this went on for 20 years. 20 years. And I was never a part of those Bible studies. I've met the fruit. I've met the fruit of those Bible studies. I met a man who was a missionary smuggling Bibles into Russia. Came out of that Bible study. I met a man who's a missionary from India. I met a man who's a missionary in Africa, in South America, in Central America. This guy, some of you have heard of him. His name's John Bevere. I don't know if you know him. He's authored many books. He's a world-renowned speaker and whatnot. Did you know that John Bevere is a Whitehall guy? Yeah, and he didn't graduate from Whitehall High School, but after his sophomore year, he moved away. But as a punk 8th grade kid, John Bevere would come to Red's Bible studies with his older sister. What kind of an impact? Open up the front cover of this book, Honor's Reward, and it says, in honor of 3 important men in my life. Who's listed number 1? Jim Heeres, who introduced me to Jesus Christ. So to think about it, this Bible study, this man who lives on Muskegon Avenue in little old Whitehall has impacted planet Earth for the kingdom. Burger King booth as a table. He's never owned a new piece of furniture in his life. Never married, never had kids. He has a flip phone that he barely knows how to use. There's continual traffic in his driveway, in and out. People that want to come in and connect with Red and get counsel from him. He has a stack of legal pads on his Burger King booth table that he continuously writes letters in correspondence with kids. Thousands over the years. He's got a prayer list. It's about 15 pages long. And he's got names on it, and he prays through it every single day. And Pastor Tim, you're on that list. Hallelujah. And once you're on his list, you don't ever leave his list. What? And all of this, that's a legacy. It's a legacy. And if he were here today, I know where he'd be sitting. He'd be sitting way in the back row. His head would be down like this, and he would be hating all of this right now. Because if you ever asked him, what was the key to legacy? I know that he would say, it's the grace of God. It's the grace of God. And I know he's telling the truth. Because I know the story when he was 4 years old, and he's bleeding, and he's dying. And the doctor's about ready to show up at his house in 1939. And he remembers his grandma coming in to say goodbye to him because he was going to die. And he remembers hearing his mom pray for him. And his mom prayed, God, if you let this child live, I will raise him for you. And he lived. And in his words, he was a dumb, freckle-faced, red-headed kid that didn't know how to read or write when he graduated from high school. That was his identity, and he lived it out in dumb living. And the police here in Muskegon knew his name, and they knew where he lived because they gave him rides home often. And this mom, who promised to raise, was having fits. And Red would tell stories about when he'd tiptoe in his house late at night, and to get to his room, he'd have to step over the legs of his grandma and the legs of his mom, who were kneeling on the sofa, praying for him out loud. And he would hear this. I wonder why Red Heeres goes into his classroom and puts his face down on his classroom chair and prays for his kids. I wonder where that comes from. Legacy. At the age of 30, the guy completely surrenders his life to Jesus Christ, and there's a legacy. God's grace, the power of a praying parent. Are we praying? And the power of a praying grandparent. Are we praying? Young guys over here, are you praying right now for your grandchildren who are yet to be who are not even born yet? Legacy starts now, 13-year-old, 14-year-old. I know one day I'm going to make a phone call, and there's not going to be an answer. Now, I know I'm going to knock on his door, and there's not going to be an answer. I know that day's coming. Red's funeral is going to be awesome. We're going to need an arena for his funeral. But that's Red Heeres. And when I think about that, I just kind of want to put it on myself and ask myself the question. When I die, is there going to be a young person other than somebody in my family? Is there going to be a young person that says, Mom, Dad, I want to go to his funeral? because he impacted my life for Jesus. Our own children are wonderful, but there's other kids in our community that need you to show up. What was it, 80%? Show up. Every child is one caring adult away from a success story. And the question is, will you be that one? Sick 'em, guys. Yeah, that's right, Heeres.
Oh, my. Wait. Tell me if if I got this right. I thought through the years there was 100 and some kids that had gone into ministry, missionaries or whatever, that had been in his class impacted by him. Is that about right?
I would say that would be a small number.
Well, I was going to say I think I'd heard like 140.
Yeah.
140 in ministry today because of a public school teacher
That's right.
that never had any kids of his own, but sowed into the lives. My, a legacy. Thank you. Well, hold on. Now, I look and someday, well, Red's out of Whitehall High School, and you took his place. You're his disciple. And I've watched you impact lives. So in a real sense, Red passed it down. It's like, tag, you're it now. Now this guy can minister to kids. But it's part of that passing down a legacy. Because I might say this, do you have a Troy Love? Red Heeres discipled another teacher at Whitehall High School. Duplicated himself. Not only kids, but leaders. Legacy. Amen. Thank you. Hallelujah.